Welcome to our Ask Me Anything Day. So I'm glad that you are here with us live or watching on the replay. And for replay viewers, know that you can still type in your question and I will come back and respond to those. So I thought I would use a background today that would kind of help give us all a feeling of love and protection and being positive. Um, so I am hoping that second semester of the school year is going to be much smoother for you and your kiddos. Just like I guess I had that same hope in the fall of 2020 that we had learned a lot from distance learning when schools suddenly had to close in March. But I think in the fall, everybody thought, oh, this will just be short term. And I'm not sure all the strategies, all the training were really put in place because I just kind of see some of the same misunderstandings, mistakes that we made in the springtime that's still happening now. So I like to come live with you at least once a month so you get to ask your question. So if you have questions about distance learning, because that's on your mind right now, go ahead and shout it out and we will brainstorm and come up with some solutions. I also have had some questions come in to me from parents, so I will start on those while you are typing in your own question. So often when parents call me and are interested in hiring me as an advocate, it's because they have this IEP meeting that is coming up in a very short amount of time. And they kind of like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get ready for this? And so one of the first things when parents ask me, I've got this meeting coming up next week. This IEP meeting is next week. What am I going to do? I ask them to look at the different places, call it different things, the letter of invitation, the notification of a meeting, because on that form, usually at the top, they'll have a reason checked as far as the purpose of the meeting. I have had many parents call me and say, help, I'm having this IEP meeting. And then they go and look at that invitation or notice of meeting, and it doesn't say it's actually going to be an IEP meeting. Sometimes that other box is checked and they'll have, informal parent-teacher conference. Well, in your mind, if you think you're going to an IEP meeting, you need to do certain things, right, to be prepared and confident when you walk in there. And you need to know at an IEP meeting, things are going to be in writing, things are going to be agreed upon, and the school will be accountable for those things. However, if you think you are going to an IEP meeting and the staff is like, oh, no, this is just a time where we can talk about your concerns. We can see if there's things that we want to change. And those kinds of conversations are like critically important. Don't get me wrong, but they're totally different than an IEP meeting. Usually at parent-teacher conferences or parent-teacher informal meetings, there might be some notes taken, so maybe some of the things are captured in writing, but if that doesn't translate to being written in the IEP, any kinds of agreements made in those informal meetings, you don't really have any way to keep the school accountable for providing those services or accommodations or whatever the discussion was about. So my number one tip for getting ready for IEP meetings is make sure it's really an IEP meeting. the other question I get sometimes when parents look back at that notice of meeting form, it's like, oh, well, they checked the school psychologist, they checked general ed teacher, special ed teacher, administrator, but they didn't put anybody's name on there. How am I supposed to know who's really coming? Um, from a federal standpoint, and remember, I'm not an attorney, so I can't give you legal advice, but my understanding as an advocate from the federal level, there's no requirement that they put a person's name who is coming to the meeting, because sometimes, that school psychologist that they wrote her name down may be sick and she's not attending, and a different school psychologist from the district is going to kind of be filling in for her. So they don't want to be obligated if they write a person's name and then for whatever reason that exact person can't be there. The requirement from a federal level is that they have certain people like the parent, a special ed teacher, a general ed teacher, somebody who can interpret test results, and then the fifth person on a federal level that's required to be at IEP meetings is someone that has the decision-making ability. So sometimes that's a building principal, sometimes that's a special ed director, assistant director, but somebody that can make decisions. And you don't come to the end of the meeting and they go, well, we'll have to ask the director if we can really do this. You want that decision maker to be at your meeting. So you have to have people fulfill those roles, but they don't have to necessarily tell you ahead of time who the person is, the name of the person. Hey, Kimberly from Iowa. And I just saw Kimberly. She said I've got a question about grading for her son in third grade. And I think it's Kim Novak, and I think it's this afternoon. I just got this email today, but we'll talk about grading here. But for people that are followers of Kim Novak, who does a lot of professional development for UDL, she's having a webinar this afternoon, and it's about standards-based, I don't know if it's called, I think it's standards-based IEPs. And I think she's also talking about grading. So you can look up Kim Novak, but let's talk here, Kimberly. Who should be giving him his grades? Right now, he gets a math and reading grade from special ed teacher, and then the science spelling from general ed teacher. And it's, there's nothing that I know of in the federal law that talks about, let's see, sorry, that talks about, who has to do the grading. So typically that is either a district decision on how that's going to happen in all the buildings, or sometimes that's a building level decision. And so you could first check with the special ed teacher, which you probably already have. But I think on a general, check with a special ed teacher, check with the general ed teacher, and see where they got this notion that the special ed teacher grades math and reading and the other teacher grades writing and spelling or whatever, and see how they came up with that. What was their thought process? Because we sometimes it's like frustrating and we just want to go like, why is this happening? But to take a step back and say, like, can you explain, do the whole Columbo thing? I'm confused. Can you help me? I'm wondering how things are decided for grading. When I was a special ed teacher, when I was a general ed teacher, we always combined, we collaborated. So I would collaborate with the other teacher when report cards were due. And then to me, the other thing is, if a student has academic goals, then the special ed teacher needs to also follow up with, a progress report, and more than just P for progressing or 2 for we made some progress, but I try to ask for a progress report that has the raw data that they took and also some narrative. But yeah, Kimberly, it looks different in different districts. And so if some of you, hey Tatum, hey Anne Marie, if others of you have some information about grading you want to share. The other thing, Kimberly, is I do have, I think, at least 2 different videos I've done in the past about grading. So since you're a trailblazer, you can use our searchy and you could type in grading and the videos will come up that I've done the grading with, and I can help you with that too. But yeah, it's pretty much a building decision if it's not your district decision. Yeah, Kimberly says she likes Kim Novak. And Kimberly says, I have them willing to talk about it at an IEP going to be scheduled for this month. So they're willing to do what I want them to do. But there you go. And I think, and because Kimberly is in our Trailblazer group, I do know, more of her situation and the person that she is. And I know, Kimberly, that the relationships that you've been developing with staff has made like a huge difference in going forward and being able to, sit down and have these kinds of discussions with them. So kudos to you, because I often say the 3 R's of advocacy are relationships, 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 right? So, Laura, how are you? Happy New Year. Laura says, Charmaine, what happens when the fill-in may not actually know the child and then are unable to offer appropriate recommendations? Yeah, and I mean, that's part of the problem, right? And I think that, I don't know, it might happen more on the secondary level because, rarely are you going to get more than one secondary level gen ed teacher there. And so like, it's, maybe the PE teacher who doesn't have a class whenever the meeting is, and the PE teacher comes in and doesn't have much input. But I have seen fabulous PE teachers that pick up on a lot of information. So yeah, and then I think it's up to you as the parent. Like, do I feel comfortable, especially when it's one of those key roles, like the gen ed teacher or the special ed teacher, if they have somebody filling in and it doesn't feel like this is really going to be productive, then I think as a parent, I would ask for it to be rescheduled, because you don't want to spend hours of your time in a meeting and then feel like it was worthless, right? So Laura, my suggestion would be to reschedule if the people there really don't know your child very well. And yes, I know, she's so good. So see, get on her email list too. Anne Marie, how are you? She said, Amanda starts in-person classes on Monday. The teacher is scared to have Amanda in her class. She alluded to the fact a shadow would not be available. Amanda likes to elope, and recess is now in an open field. The school is planning on taking data with the assumption additional accommodations will be needed. Is there anything else I should do now? Excuse me. I know they ultimately will try to push the self-contained class for her for 4K. I'm sharing resources to help with professional development. And so, hey, Anita, how are you? So yeah, and I think that's probably a really good step that the people are saying that, the staff is feeling okay and, good about saying, this is something I'm not familiar with and it is kind of scary. And so acknowledge that. And I remember when Dylan was young and I would be talking with teachers and they would say, I don't know, I've never had a student with Down syndrome in my class before. And I could feel those like uncertainties. And I would say, it's okay. I mean, I didn't know what to do with a baby with Down syndrome. Um, and I made mistakes and I made judgments I shouldn't have made. And that's okay because then we grow from there. So I think first, maybe acknowledging, the courage it took to say, I'm kind of afraid of this situation. Um, and, also acknowledge that it's going to be hard to do everything perfectly right. But if we keep in communication, it will be good. Having said that, recess in an open field is like, where's my red flag? That's like a red flag, right? So, and it's with your daughter that likes to elope. So, think of what you do when you're in situations, and I know things have been different now with COVID, but when you guys go out for a family day or whatever, like at a zoo or something like that, where it's big wide open spaces, like what do you do to keep Amanda safe? What suggestions, what tips do you have? If she stays engaged on the swing with a friend next to her swinging, is like everything going to be pretty hunky-dory? If she is feeling excluded, left out, people don't understand what she's trying to say, is that when she's more likely to elope? So, looking at, elopement is that symptom and what's underlying the cause. If there's some things like that you can share with the staff for triggers. And I mean, depending on where the school's located and what's beyond that open field, I mean, if it's a real safety issue, then I mean, I would think it's a safety issue for more kids than just Amanda. So a more long-term goal would be to work with the district to get it fenced. I don't know, something like that. If you're really worried about physical safety with that open field, there might be some of her friends, especially in the winter, right? Where you're in South Carolina, you don't get that cold, but, have a group of friends that they go down to the gym during recess time and they have like an indoor, recess. I don't know. I don't know how concerned you are for the safety, but the whole open field thing is a little unnerving to me. The other thing is, if they're, look at her IEP, Anne-Marie, and if there's specific accommodations that need to be in place that are different than what the IEP had written before, before Monday, I would want to have that IEP amended. And if there's any safety features that you want, for recess time before Monday, I would want that IEP amended and have it in writing. I would not have the staff say, well, we'll wait and try it and see how it works when it's a danger of like the open field. I mean, that's like the biggest thing that as a parent is like, oh. And as far as them feeling successful with having her included in class and, how all of that is going to look, yeah, that's going to be a learning process, right? And I think it's great that you have, resources that you can share with them. Sometimes what you can do is see if there's another teacher in the building, another teacher in the district who has included kids successfully, and have them, have some time to share and talk. When it comes from another colleague, oftentimes that, those suggestions are taken, more readily than when they get suggestions from parents. Not that we still don't keep suggesting. But I mean, there's a lot of issues there, right? And then the other concern would be training for staff. There's a whole nother semester of the school year left. We have a lot of school days left where training by the district could be written in the IEP. And again, it's not to say these teachers don't know what they're doing. It's like these teachers don't have this experience. It's, they may have the mindset, the heart set, but the skill set is what they're missing. And again, if it's like Pete Wright says, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So I would really recommend, like a virtual meeting or in person, however comfortable you feel, and amend the IEP by tomorrow. Because, that just sounds scary to me. Anita, you're in Virginia. How are you doing? Happy New Year. Anita is one of our trailblazers too. Yes, I'm going to be retiring. I'm like in a slow down phase right now. But I will be here until June of this school year. I'm not going to leave anybody in a lurch for the school year. And Tatum, look at you. She is a trailblazer. She says, love the background. Yes. What help can you provide a new family entering education with an IEP in a school with a segmented special ed system, special ed kids in separate classroom? What big picture, helpful points do you have, as it appears to be a long road ahead of us in terms of inclusion? Thanks. So Anita, Anne Marie, Kimberly, this is a collective effort, right? I don't have all the answers, and I don't have all the experiences that everyone else has had. So chime in. Kimberly, Anne Marie, Anita, if you can think back to the time when your child was in kindergarten, and they might have gotten early interventions, so you had some understanding a little bit about special ed supports from maybe your early intervention team, and then kindergarten came. And then the other thing is kindergarten came during COVID, so that makes virtual learning another part of it too. But if you just think about when your child was 5 or 6 years old and trying to get a grip on what this IEP process is like and how to navigate this maze. So can you chime in and help Tatum not only, I think, get some verbal raw that yes, it can happen. And so we have some other comments in here. I'll see if somebody talks about starting out in the IEP process and what that was like. So I think the reality is it is a long-term process, and different parents have different ways of going through that process. So for some parents, that are advocates for their kids to be included, for some parents in kindergarten, in first grade or whatever, it's like, if I can get my kid in there for music, art, PE, lunch, and recess, I'm going to be happy, because that's where we're going to start. And then the following year they say, okay, I want to add something else like science or social studies. And they gradually have their child included more. So that's one way that some parents do it. I, on the other hand, was one of those 100%. So I had the advantage because I had been a special ed teacher. My husband was a special ed teacher. So the process, the the system wasn't that hard for me because I understood how that system worked. It was more of, I was a teacher in the same district, and it was pretty strange. And we filed for due process when he was 3 over inclusion. So for us, it was like, no, this is the right way to do things. And that's how we're going to start out. It's like, I don't negotiate that children who are Black can only come to certain rooms in the school building, and maybe next year they can come in more rooms. It's like, no, this is a kid at your front door. So it depends. I know, Tatum, you are more of, you've told me that you are more of a parent that wants that 100%. And yeah, I mean, it's really hard. There's so many factors and variables to weigh, as far as how much time, how many years am I going to invest in the district, and only get really minute baby steps. When I was a special ed teacher and including kids, and this is decades ago, but, I used to hear people say, oh, you pick a teacher that's like totally into doing this and open, and that's the teacher who you try and get your kids into their class. And you have to wait. I heard you have to wait till the teacher's ready. But you know what? I mean, one, you might not have any teacher that says they're open to having your child in their classroom. And so you still have to pick somebody that's right there in the building, right? And what I found as a special ed teacher supporting students in, I remember, kindergarten classes, and the teachers weren't that excited. The teachers were real nervous and real kind of fearful, was that once the child was there and they could get to know that child as a person, as a kiddo, as somebody else, and just like so many other classmates. And yes, there's other ways that we have to support them, but waiting for the teacher for that perfect moment, for like, wait till I get trained before I do it, wait for this. It's like your child is going to be waiting a long time. And I know it's like, yeah. And Amy, hi, Amy. She says the IEP process initially very overwhelming. I would have looked at end high school to understand the mindset. I'm learning oftentimes the beginning years are fully staffed, open to parents, etc., and can look very different in later years. Yeah. So, and we hear about, having that vision statement, and so many times I think parents will write, or, through photographs or drawings or whatever, have a way to share with the staff what their vision is for their child after high school. So, Amy, I think your point is really important. And that's that North Star that's going to be guiding decisions of this IEP team. So one, they need to know your vision. Two, they need to have hopefully some buy-in to it, or at least be open, right? But this is something that, talking about your vision, talking about that North Star is going to be something that you need to bring up often, not just once a year at IEP meetings, or, not just at the 3-year reevaluation meeting. We need to capture that. And then we need to look at, okay, so what are those steps that we're going to take? Because if my vision is that my daughter is going to be happy and have friends and live in her own apartment and either go to college or have a job she adores, those kinds of things, being in a self-contained class, being pulled out to a special ed room is not going to help your daughter achieve those goals to the fullest. So yeah, it's kind of like letting your heart, letting your gut, remind you of what that vision is. And there's a variety of ways to get there. But it's inclusion. I mean, that's how I personally and professionally feel. There's way too much research to say that our kids are going to do better if they're pulled out and segregated. But let me see if other people. Tatum says, thank you. You're welcome. Oh, good. Kimberly. So if you guys are interested in Kim Novak's fireside chat today, here's the link for it. And what I always do is register for things. And then usually watch the replay, right? But if you register, at least then you'll get the replay link. And she says it's at 2:00 Pacific time. Let me go back up here. Amy, can you comment on post-graduation? I have been told no academics. So Amy, I'm assuming you're talking about like the 18 to 21-year-old, depending on your state, like those transition services. They need to be individualized, just like everything else, right? So you want to make sure that they don't just say, well, this is our transition program and this is what everybody gets. And parents think like, oh, okay, I don't know, this is what they do. But you have to look at your child and what kind of support they need. So if you feel like your child still needs some academic learning in that 18 to 21-year-old transition time, then that's something that the school can definitely provide. Now, I would, suggest that you be creative about how that gets played out. I know for Dylan, our son who has Down syndrome, like when he was getting to ready to graduate, I mean, there was no way he was going to come back to high school. But that's what most of the kids in our district did, is they would come back and they would call them super seniors. And they would take maybe classes in the morning and then in the afternoon go out and do some community things. And that's not what Dylan wanted. And Dylan wanted to go to college. So our meetings for transition were, how can we support Dylan so he can be successful in college? And this was in 2007, before there were very many, supportive, post-secondary programs. But if you think academics are important, then yeah, there's nothing, in the transition language that talks about we can only do this. And that's why now in high school, the transition part of the IEP is still in your child's, original, their IEP. It's not like a separate document. But in the transition part, they need to be talking about, further education, and that can be further academic learning, training for employment, life skills, if that is needed. And I see a lot of transition programs that are based on life skills. Like people will go, to the special ed room and it's a fake apartment and they make beds and do laundry. And I don't know, for some families that might be their choice. For me, it wasn't. So Amy, yeah, look at what your child needs and make a creative transition plan. And she says to Anne Marie, I fought with another parent to have a fence installed at our school, our open field, to stay close two state highways closed. We went to observe recess, 100 kids and two aides. My child could have eloped easily. Yeah. And I think that's, looking at that ratio is really important. Um, I've seen, in some schools, they'll have like the teacher and the aides on the playground wear like a bright neon colored vest. So if kids need help, it's easy for them to look up and see where the adults are. Something like that might be helpful. But Anne Marie also says, that she uses a wristlet in public. Good ideas. I suggested a peer helper. It's because of the virus. The playground is off limits. Oh, I see. So, well, that's pretty weird. So, in the open field, they're thinking kids can be more socially distanced. Well, then, I mean, one of the things you might look at is, is there one or two other kids that could go with her on the playground? I don't know. Yeah, I just think an open field sounds way too scary. Um, and you're under a real time crunch. So today, I would start calling people and saying, we got to come up with some ideas. And I really don't feel comfortable sending her on Monday until we have these as amendments in the IEP, would be my suggestion. Um, and Marie says, I got feedback from my mom's group and most were concerned. Honestly, the parents didn't even realize they were playing in an open field. Yeah, I bet. And that's the thing, like, right? For your daughter, it's like, and then you think, if this is a concern for your daughter, most likely there's other kids out there that are like not too happy about being at school and could kind of also wander away. Um, so one of the ways that you can get, if you can get more broad support for making something safe, like, if this is just because of COVID, I don't know if the district's going to say, yeah, we're going to, fence in this open field and spend thousands of dollars. But, is there another way? Like, I know for my grandkids' school, they have different sections labeled of the playground, like the basketball court is this section and the swing set is this section. And kids, smaller groups of kids are assigned different sections that day on the playground and then they rotate. There's things like that could happen. So like they could actually use their fenced in playground, so, and sometimes just having the time to bounce ideas off of each other when you're talking to the school team, it would be like, oh, we could do this, like maybe we have certain, almost centers at the playground, and maybe the gym is a center and that's inside, and maybe your daughter likes to do things inside. I don't know, but, be able to be open to, thinking of there's a lot of different ways we can provide kids outside time, exercise, but not have them be in an open field. So that would be what I would say. Sarah, Happy New Year. She said, hi. So we are now going into the year of being in quarantine and distance learning, or for some children are going to school part-time. I'm due to have an IEP, and this has been sitting in the back of my head. And I'm just wondering, how has your team handled behavioral goals or social goals over this whole quarantine? Has there been any modifications? My son has autism, and his behavior goals and social goals have been put on hold. But I have a gut feeling that maybe we should start and see. Then for some reason, Facebook doesn't show me the rest, Sarah. Yeah, so this is a good question because a lot of schools in January are doing more remote. I think kind of waiting to see how the COVID numbers go. Or like you said, some are going to school part-time. And yeah, I think that's, Sarah, I think you've hit the nail on the head as far as the more challenging goals that we can still work on during distance learning. And behavioral and social goals are the kind of the two categories that make it more challenging. So I don't know, Sarah, if you could like say what an example of a behavior or social goal is, and we could kind of brainstorm is how could we replicate that. um, I've talked to some parents that their kids have had social goals of turn taking. And sometimes that's like, verbal turn taking. And they've been working on that goal with the speech and language pathologist. Um, and so it's like there are, like now there's more, online kind of games that you can play on Zoom. So if your child doesn't like being on Zoom on the computer, maybe for playing a board game on Zoom would be fun. So they could still do that turn taking. You can, still have small groups in a breakout room with somebody. My big concern with breakout groups is it becomes a new, like, pull out segregated group, which is not what I want to see breakout groups used for. So again, I'm not sure what your child's goals are. It is really hard if it's a goal that, like through a computer screen, you're not going to be able to work on that. And so, many states have a separate distance learning plan, and they look at the goals that can be met during distance learning, and those are the ones that are addressed. However, your child is still really entitled to those other supports. So you can look at a couple different things. Sometimes parents are having paraeducators come into the home and help work on some behavior or social skills. Of course, again, it depends on what the specific goal is. That's been helpful for some parents. I'm trying to think of what some other parents have done. Some are just keeping track of these are all the days, the times that he has missed support on these goals. And is there a way that we can offer some compensatory education? And even though the school year is happening, you don't have to wait to the end of the school year to ask for compensatory services. That's an IEP team decision. So you call an IEP meeting. You would talk about, what are we going to do? We know during distance learning, this isn't working right now, but, what else can be happening? And if something isn't available right now because of COVID restrictions, then you are going to have to look at, okay, well, what about this summer? Hopefully this summer things are going to be more open. And maybe that's when your child has those compensatory services, because if their behavior or social goals that through a computer it's not going to work, then you have to look at somebody coming to the house. You have to look at maybe compensatory ed to make up, even though you can't really make up that lost time. So let me know if that was helpful. And you guys on here, do you have any other suggestions for Sarah? I think I might have said Laura. Sorry, I meant Sarah. So Laura says, our school district refuses to include our homebound son. He is a homebound student that has VGO robot in his IEP to be able to access the general ed curriculum in his classmates. But he transitioned to middle school, and the director basically said there were no minutes agreed to in the schedule of services, but rather only listed in technology, that they didn't have to include him. So that's pretty interesting. I don't understand what they mean by don't include him. So do you mean they're saying that So in his IEP, there were no minutes agreed to in the schedule of services. So, Laura, I mean, if a kid has an IEP, he has goals, he has services to meet those goals. So I'm not sure why there weren't services written in the IEP. So one is go back to the IEP and see exactly what's written and the verbiage that they use, because if it's generic kind of language, that's like a huge loophole. Are they saying that they don't have to have him like tune in to the general ed classes? I'm not sure what you mean by they're refusing to include him. So if you could clarify that for me. But yeah, I mean, so if there's like this real disconnect between what was happening in elementary school, and especially if that was successful, and now the middle school is like, nah, we don't do that here. Call an IEP meeting, because this is like a basic education, right, for him to be able to access it. And if the middle school is feeling like, no, they don't have to do that, that's like a huge, divide between you and the school. And so I would look at, asking for an IEP meeting and amending the IEP if it needs to be, or looking at that IEP together as a team and say, actually, there are service minutes, here it is, and, kind of re-going through that. But yeah, I wouldn't accept that, right? Because we know what we accept continues. So I would not accept my son not being included, and especially when the district has already purchased the, technology for him to be able to be home and safe, but then using the robot to tap into the classroom. So yeah, don't accept that. Anne Marie says she has an advocate for support. Yes. Or no, I think what maybe she's saying is for Tatum. I'm sorry. Tatum, I think this is your advice from Anne Marie. Have an advocate for support. Ask for the data because self-contained is the last considered, not the first. LRE. The National Down Syndrome Society can help. Yeah, except her child doesn't have Down syndrome. Hopefully that's the right initials. Learn the law for rebuttals. Ask for data. Ask for the draft. Talk about your expectations for general ed. I have the district and principal on recording acknowledging that general education is best. Yeah, so that's the other tip. Look at all those great tips you had in there, Anne Marie. Thank you. Is recording the meetings, right? That's another thing you can do. That's really helpful. Yeah, it's a process, and there's like no way that as a parent of a kindergartner you can absorb all of that, right? I mean, that's like a monumental task. So I think giving yourself grace, Tatum, is also important. And to know that your daughter is resilient, your daughter is capable of so much. And, having that mindset that, yeah, we're going to work this out, we're going to figure this out together. I think in your situation, it's just that much more of a challenge because not only is this a whole new school environment situation for you, but it all happened during COVID. So it's not like you see her teachers every day, in person and can have conversations. So it is even a little bit more challenging given the circumstances. But yeah, you, Tatum, have done an enormous amount of work, and know that it's okay because it will be all right. And to have that belief that whatever happens, we can still figure this out. We can still make this right for your daughter. Um, and sometimes, like I said, sometimes that's trying a lot with the district and then having to go to a legal route. I mean, we filed for due process when our son was 3. I was a teacher in the district. And we were able to settle at mediation, and my son got inclusive preschool in the community versus a special ed classroom. And so, yeah, those legal aspects can be considered too. It's really expensive, not only money wise, but emotionally. It can be really draining. It can be a process that takes years if the losing party continues to appeal the decisions. So it's not necessarily with a due process hearing that you're going to get a final settlement in a year. And then the trick with that is you want to try and have an IEP that is as close to what you want, because that IEP becomes her stay put IEP. And they can't change that placement while you're going through due process. But that's like a whole another kind of ball of wax, right? So you guys are good, hanging in there. Yeah, that's what. Hey, Natalie. Natalie is a special ed teacher in Idaho. Thanks for joining. She said, what does it mean he doesn't have to be included? Yeah, I'm not sure, Sarah, what that was. If you want to elaborate. So, what can working parents do if they are unable to support one-on-one during the school day? What happens to IEP goals when they go unachieved? Yeah, and so, I mean, that's kind of the $1,000,000 question too, right? So, the Federal Department of Ed has told schools many times since March that they still have an obligation to provide your child with a free, appropriate public education. I know that that's not happening in some places with some schools, right? And so, there's kind of like a level system that you can use. The first is to send an email to the special ed teacher and, describe the situation and say, where is the support for your child to be learning at home? That's not something that you're, accountable for as a parent just because of the school closing. So like I said earlier, there are districts around the country where parents have asked for support at home. I don't know, your child's health situation, but some parents have had, either a teacher or a paraeducator or a speech therapist. I mean, it kind of depends what your child needs, what supports. But they come to the house and they provide direct support. So that's one conversation you can have. They might say no, but you don't know until you ask. And then I have a friend that is an advocate, and she said no always means not yet. And so you work towards that. The other thing to do is to keep track of how much, time and support and learning your child is losing during distance learning. The other thing is, I don't know, I should put the link up. I have an ebook that I wrote all about distance learning, and there's some really good specific suggestions in here. So let me show you the link for that. And so this could be very helpful because it has specific emails in there about COVID issues. And in the email templates and examples, you can kind of use those to give you an idea. Because one, you want to make sure your email is real specific with what you're asking for. And if you're asking for a meeting, you want to give a specific time when you want the meeting to, happen by, all of those kinds of things. There's also a section in the distance learning. It's called Distance Learning Advocacy Toolkit. There's some really good specific things that you can do to keep track of your child's progress or lack of. And it starts from a really simple, have a piece of paper on your refrigerator and jot down things that you notice. But you are probably going to be in that place of asking for compensatory education services. And again, that's an IEP decision. So you bring that to the team. And again, the Federal Department of Ed has talked about, if these services aren't provided during COVID, then parents have the right to, request compensatory services. And that can be, a tutor coming to the house, or, a tutor working with your child during the summer if, you want to wait for, health reasons. It could be they contract with somebody outside of the district. If the district doesn't have the staff to provide what your child needs, then they contract with somebody else that provides those services. But yeah, it's way too hard for parents that are working. I mean, it's like impossible. I don't know, maybe nothing's impossible, but I mean, it's like, yeah, the truth. I mean, you have to be working, you have a job, you have to have, an income for your family. And the district still has their obligations. So, I would request a meeting if you're in a place where you've already talked to them and it's like there's no solving this. Then you might want to ask for a facilitated IEP meeting because that can be helpful. There's a neutral person there to guide the process, and they don't get involved in the content of the concerns, but they make sure everybody's voice is heard, and it can be really helpful to have that neutral person. Another avenue is mediation. Because like I said earlier, what we accept continues. So if we continue to say, well, I know it's hard because of COVID, I guess I'll be working and my child will be doing something else, that's what's going to keep happening, right? But that's not the education that your child deserves. It's not the education that your child is entitled to. And unfortunately, sometimes parents have to use, those other ways to solve, disputes. And you might not be able to solve it at the IEP meeting level. But for sure, your child would be entitled to compensatory services, in my non-legal opinion. So Natalie was suggesting, and I think, Natalie, you're a middle school teacher, aren't you? Talk to his teachers and see if there are any options for him to go to school, because some schools are making that happen. Thanks. Jessica, Happy New Year. My son, who has an intellectual disability diagnosis, has spent his entire elementary career being independent in regards to navigating his school day and being able to spend the majority of his day with his general ed class along with his peers. So that's the thing, right? It's like, it's those, Jessica, it reminds me of some of what Kathy Snow, a friend of mine, says about those unintended consequences. And now we look back and we say, boy, look at all this independence we were Well, and I guess maybe I should read it again. Has been becoming independent. Okay, and I had the picture of being dependent on a parent. So your son was independent in regarding his, look at that. See. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, Jessica. So I think that's another tip for Tatum, that look at good news, right? Things are happening, kids are being included. Tatum is also in the state of Washington, which has been doing some good professional development, and some specific changes are really happening in Washington. So Tatum, hang on to that hope, because I think you are the perfect trailblazer that will help make a difference. And thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing your success that your child's had. And I'm sure it took some good advocacy on your part. Julie Custon, if you're still in the house, hey there. I think she likes no means not yet. And so as parents, as teachers, because sometimes teachers are asking for things and they're being told no by administrators. So it's not just parents that get frustrated by hearing that word no. There are hundreds of thousands of teachers out there that are also advocating for our kiddos. So we are almost at the top of the hour. Let me know if you have any other questions. And next week, I am busy in IEP land, so we won't have a live show next week. However, January 21st, I'm going to be a guest on a Zoom show, and I was going to bring up, this is a parent training and information center kind of collaborative group in Texas called Partners Resource Network. And so I've asked to be a speaker on their Zoom meeting, and we are going to be talking about evaluations and the parent input that is really important before you even sign consent for evaluation. So that'll be coming up later this month. If you are on my email list, I'll let you know about upcoming events. And if you're not on my email list, just ask and I will put you on there. So today, as some of our hearts are more heavy, and our thoughts are with so many people that are marginalized, that their voices aren't being heard, I just hope that you also have time, if it's appropriate, for you to talk with your children about things that that they've already heard or going to be hearing on the national news. I did last night post a resource on my Visions and Voices Together Facebook page about talking to different age level children about traumatic events and how we can deal with that. I have some additional resources that I found this morning. So if that's helpful for you, I'll be posting those things on our Facebook page, and wishing you a wonderful beginning to 2021 and a second semester that brings more learning for your child, and more time for them to be with their classmates. So until the 21st of January, I'm Charmaine Thaner, and we will talk later. Bye-bye.